Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1 through chapter 7, verse 27. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. When a person sins and commits a trespass against the Lord by deceiving his fellow citizen in regard to something held in pledge, or something stolen, or by extorting something from his fellow citizen, or has found something lost and denies it, and swears falsely concerning any one of the things that someone might do to sin, when it happens that he sins, and he is found guilty, then he must return whatever he had stolen, and whatever he had extorted, or the thing that he had held in trust, or the lost thing that he had found, or anything about which he swears falsely. He must restore it in full and add 1/5 to it. He must give it to its owner when he is found guilty. Then he must bring his guilt offering to the Lord, a flawless ram from the flock, convertible into silver shekels, for a guilt offering to the priest. So the priest will make atonement on his behalf before the Lord, and he will be forgiven for whatever he has done to become guilty. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. Command Aaron and his sons. This is the law of the burnt offering. The burnt offering is to remain on the hearth on the altar all night until morning, and the fire of the altar must be kept burning on it. Then the priest must put on his linen robe and must put linen leggings over his bare flesh, and he must take up the fatty ashes of the burnt offering that the fire consumed on the altar, and he must place them beside the altar. Then he must take off his clothes and put on other clothes, and he must bring the fatty ashes outside the camp to a ceremonially clean place. But the fire which is on the altar must be kept burning on it. It must not be extinguished. So the priest must kindle wood on it morning by morning, and he must arrange the burnt offering on it, and offer the fat of the peace offering up in smoke on it. A continual fire must be kept burning on the altar. It must not be extinguished. This is the law of the grain offering. The sons of Aaron are to present it before the Lord in front of the altar, and the priest must take up with his hand some of the choice wheat flour of the grain offering, and some of its olive oil, and all of the frankincense that is on the grain offering, and he must offer its memorial portion up in smoke on the altar as a soothing aroma to the Lord. Aaron and his sons are to eat what is left over from it. It must be eaten unleavened in a holy place. They are to eat it in the courtyard of the meeting tent. It must not be baked with yeast. I have given it as their portion for my gifts. It is most holy, like the sin offering and the guilt offering. Every male among the sons of Aaron may eat it. It is a perpetual allotted portion throughout your generations from the gifts of the Lord. Anyone who touches these gifts must be holy. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. This is the offering of Aaron and his sons, which they must present to the Lord on the day when he is anointed. 1/10 of an ephah of choice wheat flour as a continual grain offering, half of it in the morning and half of it in the evening. It must be made with olive oil on a griddle, and you must bring it well soaked. So you must present a grain offering of broken pieces as a soothing aroma to the Lord. The high priest who succeeds him from among his sons must do it. It is a perpetual statute. It must be offered up in smoke as a whole offering to the Lord. Every grain offering of a priest must be a whole offering. It must not be eaten. Then the Lord spoke to Moses. Tell Aaron and his sons, this is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering is slaughtered, the sin offering must be slaughtered before the Lord. It is most holy. The priest who offers it for sin is to eat it. It must be eaten in a holy place, in the court of the meeting tent. Anyone who touches it, its meat must be holy, and whoever splatters some of its blood on a garment, you must wash whatever he splatters it on in a holy place. Any clay vessel it is boiled in must be broken, and if it was boiled in a bronze vessel, then that vessel must be rubbed out and rinsed in water. Any male among the priests may eat it. It is most holy. But any sin offering from which some of its blood is brought into the meeting tent to make atonement in the sanctuary must not be eaten. It must be burned up in the fire. This is the law of the guilt offering. It is most holy. In the place where they slaughter the burnt offering, they must slaughter the guilt offering, and the officiating priest must splash the blood against the altar's sides. Then the one making the offering must present all its fat, the fatty tail, the fat covering the entrails, the 2 kidneys, and the fat on their sinews, and the protruding lobe on the liver, which he must remove along with the kidneys. Then the priest must offer them up in smoke on the altar as a gift to the Lord. It is a guilt offering. Any male among the priests may eat it. It must be eaten in a holy place. It is most holy. The law is the same for the sin offering and the guilt offering. It belongs to the priest who makes atonement with it. As for the priest who presents someone's burnt offering, the hide of that burnt offering which he presented belongs to him. Every grain offering which is baked in the oven or made in the pan or on the griddle belongs to the priest who presented it. Every grain offering, whether mixed with olive oil or dry, belongs to all the sons of Aaron, each one alike. This is the law of the peace offering, sacrifice, which he is to present to the Lord. If he presents it on account of thanksgiving, along with the thank offering sacrifice, he must present unleavened loaves mixed with olive oil, unleavened wafers smeared with olive oil, and well soaked, ring-shaped loaves made of choice wheat flour mixed with olive oil. He must present this grain offering in addition to ring-shaped loaves of leavened bread, which regularly accompany the sacrifice of his thanksgiving peace offering. He must present one of each kind of grain offering as a contribution offering to the Lord. It belongs to the priest who splashes the blood of the peace offering. The meat of his thanksgiving peace offering must be eaten on the day of his offering. He must not set any of it aside until morning. If his offering is a votive or free will sacrifice, it may be eaten on the day he presents his sacrifice, and also the leftovers from it may be eaten on the next day. But the leftovers from the meat of the sacrifice must be burned up in the fire on the 3rd day. If some of the meat of his peace offering sacrifice is ever eaten, on the 3rd day it will not be accepted. It will not be accounted to the one who presented it, since it is spoiled, and the person who eats from it will bear his punishment for iniquity. The meat which touches anything ceremonially unclean must not be eaten. It must be burned up in the fire. As for ceremonially clean meat, everyone who is ceremonially clean may eat the meat. The person who eats meat from the peace offering sacrifice, which belongs to the Lord, while his uncleanness persists, will be cut off from his people. When a person touches anything unclean, whether human uncleanness, or an unclean animal, or an unclean detestable creature, and eats some of the meat of the peace offering sacrifice, which belongs to the Lord, that person will be cut off from his people. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Tell the Israelites, you must not eat any fat of an ox, sheep, or goat. Moreover, the fat of an animal that has died of natural causes, and the fat of an animal torn by beasts, may be used for any other purpose, but you must certainly never eat it. If anyone eats fat from the animal, from which he presents a gift to the Lord, that person will be cut off from his people. And you must not eat any blood of the birds or the domesticated land animals in any of the places where you live. Any person who eats any blood, that person will be cut off from his people." Yeah, so you have several different sacrificial ordinances here being shown to Moses that the people can bring to the Levites, and the way in which they're to be presented, and what's to be presented, and who's allowed to eat what, and a lot of the realities, I suppose, of presenting these offerings. Let's see here. If a person sins and commits a trespass against the Lord, this continues the section starting at Leviticus 5:14 regarding the guilt offering. Here we see that the guilt offering was required in cases of theft. Sins of lying and deception are also mentioned, but these are in connection with lying in order to steal from someone else. We note that it says against the Lord. These were obviously sins against other people, but they were also sins against God and had to be dealt with as such. Yeah. I think that's one thing that we can very, very easily discount, is that the sins that we commit against another person are ultimately against the Lord. And as such, we may get right with another person, but have we gotten right with God, type thing. And yeah. Ultimately, this is kind of why claims in Mark, where Jesus says, like, to the paralytic man, "Son, your sins are forgiven," Jesus acts as the one primarily offended in the relationship there. Like if somebody stole something from you, and I said, "Don't worry, I forgive them," that would be wrong on my part and enormously proud. But for Jesus, he can say that because he's God. Extorted from his neighbor. The idea here is one gaining something that belongs to another person by means other than outright theft. It usually involves trickery of some kind. All this is founded on a basic idea clearly stated in Exodus 20:15. You shall not steal. Every command against stealing in the Bible is recognition of the right to personal property, that God trusts people to manage property as delegated owners of that property. Since ultimately all things belong to God, men only own things that are delegated to them by God. Yet God expects humanity to respect his delegation of property, and other people or states are not permitted to take that property without due process of law. Therefore, economic or political systems that reject the principle of the private ownership of property, such as communist or socialist systems, which claim that all property belongs to the state or the collective, those systems reject God's wisdom and will and are destined to failure. Yeah. He shall restore what he has stolen. If a person was guilty of fraud or theft, it wasn't enough to make a sacrifice to cover the guilt of the sin before God. They first had to make restitution to settle the account with the victim of the fraud. He shall restore its full value and add 1/5 more to it, and give it to whomever it belongs on the day of his trespass offering. It wasn't enough to just return what was stolen. The thief also had to add 20% to what was stolen as a penalty. In the New Testament, Ephesians 4:28 expresses another aspect of restitution when the thief repents of being a taker and becomes a giver. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Yeah. And I think this is a very important thing that's often neglected, is that the resources that we have that God has delegated to us aren't our own, but merely temporarily given to us as stewards from God. And as such, we should manage those resources wisely and give to those who are in need. Yeah. Yeah, and not just spend it all on our own selfish desires, but yeah, give with a willing hand. So the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord. This was a marvelous assurance for a guilty conscience. The sinner could depend upon this promise and know his sin was covered before the Lord. The New Testament makes a similar statement. In 1 John 1:9, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. The law of the burnt offering. The animal had to remain upon the altar in a slow burn for a long time, tended by the priests. We may therefore reasonably conclude that the priests sat up by turns the whole night and fed the fire with portions of this offering till the whole was consumed. The description given in chapter 1 did not include the instruction regarding the required garments of the priests. His linen garment and his linen trousers he shall put on his body. It also did not include the direction for the priest to deposit the ashes of the burnt sacrifice outside the camp to a clean place once he had taken off his priestly garments. And the fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it. The long burning character of the burnt offering is an appropriate illustration of the work of giving ourselves completely to God. Coming to God as a living sacrifice is not a quick work, and we may feel that we, like the burnt offering, endure the heat of a fire for a long time. A fire shall always be burning on the altar. It shall never go out. The phrasing of this is emphatic and shows that keeping the altar fire always burning was an important duty of the priests. They had to supply wood to the altar fire through the night. Through the day, the continual offering of sacrifices would keep the fire burning. As it happened, the altar's fire was ignited by miraculous fire coming from heaven in Leviticus 9:24. And there came a fire out from before the Lord, and consumed upon the altar the burnt offering and the fat, which when all people saw, they shouted and fell on their faces. This added to the reason why the altar's fire should never be allowed to go out. This was God's fire, and it needed to be respected and cared for. God started it, and the priests were responsible for keeping it going. The perpetual fire was also connected to the idea that these sacrifices must be continually offered. The perfect sacrifice Jesus made on the cross did not need to be a continual sacrifice. It was a once-for-all sacrifice, as described in Hebrews 27. He who does not need daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the people's, for this he did once for all when he offered up himself. Regarding the grain offering, everyone who touches them must be holy. One aspect of the grain offering, specifically detailed here but not included in chapter 2, is that not only was the portion of the offering given to the priests, but only those who were ceremonially clean could eat of it. For the sin offering, in a holy place it shall be eaten. Everyone who touches its flesh must be holy. Everything connected to the eating of it had to be holy. Anything touched by the meat of the sin offering or its blood had to be holy or be cleansed in a special manner, because the animal's meat was thought to be infected with the sin of the one who brought the offering. When sin soaks into something, there is no way it can be cleansed, and it must be destroyed. Yet a metal, tempered by fire, has already been judged, and can therefore simply be cleansed. This is an illustration that those who do not have their sin cleansed by Jesus will be destroyed by that sin in an eternal sense. The earthen vessel that it was boiled in shall be broken, but the bronze pot shall be both scoured and rinsed in water. The law of the trespass offering. The procedure for the trespass offering was previously described in chapter 5. A trespass is a particular kind of sin. Trespassing is the unlawful crossing of a boundary. God has certain boundaries for humanity in general and for his people specifically, and when they cross those boundaries, it is a sin of trespass. He shall offer from it all its fat. When the trespass offering is described in chapter 5, the focus is on the reasons why it would be necessary to make the offering. It said nothing of what to do with the blood or the fat of the sacrificial animal. Here the priest is instructed to offer the fatty portions of the animal. Adam Clarke clarified the sense of all its fat, chiefly the fat that was found in a detached state, not mixed with muscles. Baked in the oven, and all that is prepared in the covered pan or in a pan. The grain offerings prepared in the oven, the covered pan, and the pan were first mentioned in Leviticus 2. Here it is made clear that a portion of those offerings belong to the priest. Regarding the peace offerings, he shall offer leavened bread, in addition to the unleavened cakes or wafers. The prohibition of leaven in any offering was apparently only relevant to those things which were burnt upon the altar. This leavened bread, that was part of the peace offering ceremony, was not offered upon the altar, but presented in a heave offering. Also described, Leviticus 23 also describes leavened bread used in a wave offering. In the symbolism of the sacrificial system, this is fascinating. The peace offering was accompanied by the priests holding before God unleavened bread in one hand and leavened bread in the other. In some ritual manner, the unleavened and the leavened were weaved before the Lord. From a New Testament perspective, we may connect this to the fact that Jesus Christ has made peace between Jew and Gentile, breaking down the wall that previously separated them. And Jesus Christ himself is our peace, because of the sacrifice he made of his own flesh. Flesh that touches any unclean thing shall not be eaten. The meat that came from this peace offering that could be eaten had to be kept in a ceremonially clean manner. Ceremonial purity was required of anyone who wanted to participate in the fellowship meal associated with the peace offering. This illustrates the principle that we cannot enjoy the peace of God until we have received his cleansing grace. The person who touches any unclean thing and who eats, if a person who was ceremonially unclean did eat of the meat of a peace offering, it was a serious sin. Such disregard of the holiness of God's sacrifice meant that person shall be cut off from his people. Presumably, the strong penalty of excommunication was reserved for those who unknowingly ate of the peace offering while ceremonially unclean. If they did it accidentally or unknowingly, there was a sacrifice specifically accepted for it. It isn't that God demands perfection. The presence of the leavened loaf shows that isn't true. But when a believer today tries to receive spiritual things while knowingly unclean, there is some separation in regard to their fellowship with God. If we say that we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. From 1 John 1:6. Moreover, the believer must not participate if unconfessed sin is in his life in the Lord's Supper. Like the Israelite who ate the sacrifice in a state of uncleanness, the believer who partakes of the Lord's Supper in an unworthy state may expect the direct judgment of God. Moreover, you shall not eat any blood in any of your dwellings, whether of bird or of beast. Whoever eats any blood, that person shall be cut off from his people. The law of the Old Covenant prohibited the Israelite from the direct eating of blood of any kind. The blood represents the life of the animal or person, and the life belongs to God. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.